Good evening, and welcome to the historic Jenkins Auditorium at Malden High School. I am John O'Terry, Superintendent of Schools in Malden. Thank you for coming to tonight's presentation of Project Equity. Before we go any further with our introductions, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First and most importantly, we have interpreters available. They can stand in between the two rows in the back. We have Spanish. Tenemos un intérprete de español. ¿Dónde? We have Haitian Creole, Portuguese, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Arabic. I think those are all we have covered tonight, correct? Well, it's about equity, and we want to make sure everybody has equitable access to this presentation. For your safety and security, the emergency exits are to the rear of the auditorium. Our restrooms are located on my left is the men's room, and on my right is the ladies' room. So welcome. Thank you for coming. You are here tonight because you are invested in the future, in our students, and advocating to ensure that each one of our students has the access and opportunity to a high-quality 21st century education, which will provide each of our students the skills and experience that will enable every one of our students to succeed. To that point, we'd like to thank and recognize our state and local officials who have been tireless advocates and continue to support our students in our schools. And I'd like to call upon each elected official here in the audience to stand when I call your name. First, the Mayor of the great city of Malden, Mr. Gary Christensen. I'd also like to recognize the state delegation here in Malden. Senator Jason Lewis. Representative Paul Donato. Representative Steve Altrino. We have Carol Ty from the Revere School Committee. David Ella from the Everett School Committee. Everett Public School, sorry. Marconi Barros from the Everett Public Schools. Thomas Dalton from the Stoneham School Committee. Michael McLaughlin from the Everett City Council. Rob McCarthy, Malden School Committee. Michael Drummy from the Malden School Committee. John Ford from the Lynn Public Schools School Committee. Tara Beardsley, Malden School Committee. Debbie DiMaria, Counselor at Large in Malden. Anna Nunzio from the Salem School Committee. Colleen Leon, Malden Public School Committee. Ryan O'Malley, Malden City Council. Bob Vogler, Methuen School Committee. Donna Coppola, Lynn School Committee. Lorraine Gately, Lynn School Committee. Mary Jones, the Secretary of the Lynn School Committee. Here on behalf of Representative Dan Cahill of Lynn is Joe Gill. Robin Ennis from Mayor McGee of Lynn's office. John Obremski from the Melrose School Committee. Susan Nicholson, Methuen School Committee. Brian Castellanos from the Lynn School Committee. Peg Crow, Malden City Council. Stacy Rizzo, Revere School Committee. And Jerry Visconti, Revere School Committee. And Paul Broder from State Representative here in Melrose and Malden. Are there any other elected officials I failed to recognize? please. Oh, one last, couple more coming in. John Foyle, Malden School Committee. Senator Pat Jalen, representing Somerville. And Carrie Norman, Somerville School Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for your time. Thank you very much to our elected officials who are taking time out of their very busy schedules.
Chelsea School Committee members,
Rosemary Carlisle, Chelsea School Committee. Richard Morosky, the chairman of the Chelsea School Committee. Susan Gravellisi, Revere School Committee. And Michelle Lesio from Speaker DeLeo's office. Okay, at this time, I'm going to turn our program over to our moderator, Superintendent of the Brockton Public Schools, Dr. Kathleen Smith.
Good evening, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be here with so many of the key stakeholders that care about the kids in our Commonwealth. And in fact, this journey for many of us began a long time ago, and I do want to start by telling you a story. So I've been superintendent in Brockton for 6 years, but I've actually been an educator in Brockton for 42 years. And the reason that I say that, is when you talk about 25 years of ed reform, Brockton claims to have been, and has in fact been the lead plaintiff in the McDuffie case, which again became the change in ed reform, the foundation formula. And when I look out at so many of you and my superintendent counterparts, elected officials here, that made a difference in a child's education. I sat there as a teacher in Brockton. There were 35 kids in a class, there weren't enough desks. We didn't have updated curriculum or textbooks. We certainly didn't have, obviously, a different time with technology. We weren't able to give them extracurricular, academic support, all of the things that being a teacher in the district and watching the changes that happened in an urban district. We're a failing urban district. When those first scores came out with MCAS, your high-stakes testing, Brockton had a 75% failure rate in mathematics. Within a very short period of time, when that budget was infused with money from the foundation formula and equity for all students, a change took place. Brockton, and you can fill in your own community when I say this, a total turnaround, defied their demographics, opportunities for kids for extended learning time, after school, extracurricular, academic support, English language learners. We were able to serve a large, over 17,000 student population, a very diverse population, and gave those students an equity that, again, defied their demographics and made a difference. They were highlighted in world news reports, the New York Times on the front page, talking about an urban district. When I came on as superintendent, I have to tell you, there had been years that had gone by where we watched the foundation formula eroded. Brockton, again, brought a case to the court in 2005. It was called the Hancock case, another plaintiff out of Brockton. We were pushed back at that time because they talked about what the court felt was the adequacy of that budget, the foundation budget formula. Justice Margaret Boxford at the time left the door open in talking about that adequacy. In coming on as superintendent in 2013, one of the things I have to tell you, we had survived on Race to the Top money. It was a time when there were many grants throughout districts, and that is truly how we survived, but also saw the eroding of the formula affecting real children in front of us. I was very excited, and right up on this same stage here is Superintendent Dr. Mary Bork from Chelsea, and she was part of the Foundation Commission to review the foundation budget. In our district, and I'm sure districts across the state, and I'm talking rural districts, I'm talking urban districts, and I'm talking suburban districts, there were opportunities in a year period where there were public hearings held, where people could talk about what was stressing your budget. And we were excited because there was going to be attention paid to this formula that at that point was well over 20 years old. We made sure that we attended every single one of the sessions all over the state, somebody from our district was there to talk about low income, English language learners, special education, inflation factors, health insurance, all of the things that were not allowing us to provide the services that we desperately needed to provide if we're talking about a strong economy in the state. I watched the work that went on with Alice Peisch and Senator Sonia Jane Diaz, Representative Alice Peisch, and Mary, and again, so many stakeholders from so many probably of the organizations that are here tonight were hopeful that change was coming. In late 2015, a report was issued. Many of you have it. I have a copy of it right here. And it was, again, the Foundation Budget Review Commission final report. And although we were unable at that point, when you talk about the millions of dollars needed to be infused into budgets, you know, the Commonwealth was not at a point where they could do that, but they certainly had many, many recommendations. But they looked at the recommendations that would make a difference for kids throughout the Commonwealth. And those recommendations did address English language learner support, did address low-income students, did address special education costs, did address inflation factors, did look at healthcare costs. All of those things were looked at, and we were very hopeful. Working again with superintendents right up here on this stage, we took every effort we could to go out there, to meet with Speaker of the House and his team, you know, to meet with many of our representatives and talk to them about what we needed in order to put forward an educated group of students that were not only going to be successful, but would come back. They would attend great colleges and universities, opportunities to go into the workforce. I remember in the summer of, I believe, 2017, going into the State House with a joint committee hearing all of the different bills. And I was very excited at the time because Paul Revel, former Secretary of Education during the advent of ed reform, got up there, looked at our legislative delegation, and basically said, you have the information in front of you. You need to start to act on this. The time is right. And again, here we are a couple of years later. So tonight is not about casting blame. We feel we're actually at a good place where we are out all over the state tonight. In Fitchburg, many communities meeting in Central Mass. In New Bedford, many communities are meeting with the South Coastal area. So there are people all over the state tonight doing exactly what we're doing, and this is about education. This is about what do we want for our kids. Do we want kids' education and opportunities determined by a zip code? You know, when you look at meeting foundation at 100%, which Brockton barely does, you know, we are unable to compete when you talk about districts that are able to go above and beyond 25%, 50%, 75% above foundation. The time is right to make sure that every child has equal opportunity to an equitable education. I will tell you before I hand it over to the panel, and you will hear, we have questions posed this evening. We also are going to open it up to the audience to hear what some of your questions are. You, again, have a panel here. I guess I should actually go through and, before I open it up, is have the panel introduce themselves, and then what I would like to do is come back and tell you one more story. Mary?
Good evening, and thank you so much for attending tonight's forum. I am Dr. Mary Burke. I am the superintendent of the Chelsea Public Schools. I am in my 8th year as superintendent and 7 years before that as assistant superintendent / deputy superintendent. And I served for 2 years on the Foundation Budget Reform Commission.
Good evening. I'm Tom Ambrosino. I'm the city manager of the city of Chelsea. I've been city manager there for 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was mayor in the city of Revere for 12 years. And a member of the Revere School Committee for 6 years.
Good evening, I'm Malden High. I'm the Chief Budget Officer for the City of Brockton. I'm with the school department for about 11 years, and prior to that, I was the city auditor for about 8 years. So I've learned both sides of city and school government.
I'm Diane Kelly. I'm the superintendent of the Revere Public Schools. This is my 4th year in that role, and I was assistant superintendent for 5 years prior to that, and a math teacher at the high school, other administrative roles, all in Revere, before moving into central administration.
Hi, David DeRusi. Over 30 years in education to date. Special ed teacher. Mary Bork and I were assistant principals in Chelsea together. I've been a high school principal in Revere, and this is currently my 8th year as superintendent. I did 5 wonderful years here in Malden. I'm currently in Saugus.
Hi, I'm Kim Driscoll. I'm the mayor in the city of Salem, Massachusetts. I've been doing that. This is my 14th year. I'm also the chair of the Salem School Committee.
And before I hand it over to Aldo Petronio, who will share with you what started out back last March of the Tale of Two Cities. Brockton went to Worcester, and we actually presented to the Worcester School Committee, along with our school committee, all of the things that were stressing the budgets in both Brockton and Worcester. We took the show on the road in October at an invitation from Western Mass, with Holyoke and Springfield joining Brockton and Worcester. And tonight I named numerous communities that are doing the same thing. So you will see the story of the tale of many, many cities throughout this district. I started by telling you what it felt like in Brockton in those early years before ed reform came in with the foundation formula and an infusion of resources for our students. I do want to tell you, when I opened up the Brockton Public Schools in September of 2017, a year ago, it was the hardest opening I ever had. Normally, superintendents are motivating and it's exciting, and you're talking about your strategic planning. And what I did in an auditorium that looked just like this is I put yellow ribbons on 80 seats throughout the auditorium, large yellow ribbons, so people couldn't sit in those seats. And when the close to 1,400 teachers came into the auditorium wondering why those ribbons were there, they signified 80 teachers that had been laid off that had been there the year previously. And it was not because of a loss in student population. It was because of a $16 million budget deficit that did not allow us to, again, look at high-quality curriculum, did not allow us to add additional technology. It was cutting of extracurricular programs, clubs for students, class ratio and student-teacher ratio in kindergarten classes without support from paraprofessionals, up to 27 little 5-year-olds in a kindergarten class. So this remains unacceptable. We are very excited about the advocacy. We need every one of you to think about your own children, to think about why you're here tonight, and are you going to be an advocate for the students all over the Commonwealth, the urban, the rural, the suburban students that deserve a much better education than we are providing for them right now. Massachusetts is #1, and every one of us is proud of leading the nation and do this work each and every day. But #1 has to be for every one of our students. So I'm very pleased right now to introduce our Chief Budget Officer, Aldo Petronio, who will talk about the tale of many cities here. Aldo?
Good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. As what's behind me is a PowerPoint that began with Worcester and myself, Brian Allen, the Chief Financial Officer for the Worcester Public Schools, and I did it for Brockton. We did an original presentation on this. Since then, it has kind of morphed and has gone up to many other communities. As you can see on this one, we've included for this evening Chelsea, Lynn, Malden, Revere, Salem, and Saugus. So, although the report's lengthy, I'm going to kind of flip through it, otherwise we'd be here all evening. So I'd like to also acknowledge on this report that a lot of information came from the Mass Budget Policy Center, which is Colin Jones is their analyst, and he provided us with a lot of data for the slides. They're a think tank out of Boston. What they do is they analyze data, not only for school, but they analyze much of the state's financial doings, and they analyze the data and report on it independently of anyone else. So that's why the information we have here is pretty cut and dry. The Foundation Budget Review Report specifically comes down to about 4 areas that they've acknowledged that the formula is lacked. And as Superintendent Smith had said, it's special education, it's health insurance, it's English language learners, and it's low-income students, children in poverty. So this PowerPoint is going to basically focus on those 4 areas. So those are the 4 that we're advocating for at this point. What I'm going to show you in this PowerPoint is how over the past 25 years, the formula has basically gone up and then gone down and eroded away, and has taken away from the education of the students in Massachusetts. I'm going to flip to slide number 8. As you can see, starting back around 1993, when the ed reform came into play, the foundation, the funding that went to the school systems went straight up on the graph here, basically sending additional funding to all of the schools. The next 15 years or so, you can see it stayed pretty much flat, or if not, dipped a little. That's what we found, that the formula was no longer properly reflecting the costs and the needs of the students in the school systems. So during that period is when this discussion came up that the formula really needs to be looked at. There was nothing in the formula that said you must adjust to make it continue. So we began with, as we said earlier, the McDuffie case, the Webby case, that went through the McDuffie case, and the Hancock case. That's what resulted in the increase in the revenues. But since those cases have gone away, it's basically gone flat. So there's, like I said before, there's no mechanism in the formula to increase that aid to us. And the problem is it doesn't guarantee any additional income, especially to areas that are, especially in areas where student population is more dense, or urban, or more rural. I'm going to jump forward now to slide number 11. So as I said, these are the districts we'll be representing here tonight, the ones that are impacted. And again, this first section is on health insurance and special education. What I'm going to be describing to you are what we call the budget gaps. And beginning with Chelsea, what this graph shows you is that their health insurance and benefit costs, according to the formula looks at the number of students and the makeup of those students in your schools, and it looks at the city and towns that are participating in that district, and it comes up with an amount of money they feel is necessary. So a very wealthy district receives a lower amount of money, very poor district receives a larger amount of money under the formula. So according to the formula, it says for health insurance and other benefits, Chelsea should be spending $7.7 million on those costs. When in actuality, this is for FY17, 2 years ago, they spent $15.9 million on those costs. $8.2 million gap. How do you make up that gap? As Superintendent Smith had said, you make that gap up by raising class size, by cutting out curriculum, by cutting out technology, by eliminating all of those extra programs and wraparound services. That's how you begin to do that. The formula was lacking in keeping up with the pace. So I'll have this for each district, so I'll go through them kind of quick. But you'll see, this is Lynn, same thing. The formula said $17.7 million is what you should be spending on health and benefits. They spent $38.4. $20.7 million gap. Now on these slides, you'll also see to the side, this is what districts have done to try and combat those rising costs. They reduced the plans, they changed the contribution rates. Some towns were at 90% town funded, 10% employee funded. Most cities and towns in the states now are 75% employee, 25% employee, 75% city. So they've raised the contribution rates. They've also raised the deductibles. We in Brockton don't see any more $5 deductibles. We don't see any $10 or $15 deductibles. The deductibles have gone up. We keep changing these plans. We're running, if not the same as the state, very similar to the state. They call it GIC plans, where basically the employee is paying more. They're paying a larger deductible. A hospital visit is a minimum on most cities and towns of $100 deductible. Doctor's visits at $25 deductible. Those have all gone up. We've all been trying to match what the state is doing on those. So, if you look through Malden, $7.7 million is what the formula provides. 14.4 is what they're spending. $6.7 million gap. Again, you see the same actions they've taken. They've changed the co-pays, they've changed the contributions, and they've changed the plans. I know in Brockton we used to offer Blue Cross Master Medical, no more. It took some negotiating with the unions, but that plan was eliminated. It was just too costly of a plan. So we've been making those cuts. Revere, 7.6 million according to the formula, 13.8 for the cost, 6.5 million in the gap. And again, these gaps are covered by cutting other areas in the budget. Salem, 4.9 million, 11 million, $6.1 million gap. Again, they've also made all of these changes. Saugus, 2.6 million, 10.3 million, $7.7 million gap. They've even gone as far as outsourcing whole departments, cutting staff to try and keep up with those rising costs. I'm going to jump forward to slide 15 in your packet. That'll be the special education budgets. So as we said, the two major areas are health and special ed. Again, in Chelsea, formula says they should spend 7.8 million, they're spending 15.2. It's a $7.4 million gap. You can't really make any cuts in special ed. The best you can do is try and work with it, because these students are afforded these services. Many of these students move to the towns and provide the better services to get them. Over here, they've expanded their in-house services for autism. They've set their rules up such that in order to be approved for one of these plans, it's much tighter to get into one of the special ed programs. Internal speech and vision services. You'll see this amongst many of the slides. What districts and towns have done now is gotten together and said, instead of you sending 5 students out and us sending 8 students out, why don't one of us make the program in our own school, hire a teacher that specializes in that, put the aides in there, we'll keep those students in-house and keep them there. When you send them out, they're very expensive. To try and manage to do it in-house, if you have enough students in that particular area, you save money. So we've been working as a collaborative amongst all of ourselves and all of our surrounding districts to try and help reduce those costs. Lynn, same thing here. Lynn, 17.8 was the formula, 31.5, $13.7 million gap. And again, these formula figures, they're not derived by simple math. They actually go and look at every single student you have in your district. Those students are coded as to what services they need. So those codes go into the formula. If you have 128 students that have special ed needs, you get so much funding for those 128 students. If you have 412 that are bilingual, you receive so much funding for those students. So it's very specific when the funding comes out. These are the areas we're talking about in the formula that need to be adjusted. They have certain dollar values that go with those formulas. Some of them we feel are too low. They need to increase the amount of money to give you for special ed. They need to increase the amount of money to give you for low-income students because they're more expensive to educate. Okay, Malden, 8.1 million in special ed costs. They're spending 21.8. Revere, 8.1, they're spending 17.2. Again, you see on the side, additional use of special education collaboratives. Increased participation. They're trying to, instead of having 3 students in a special ed area, they're trying to gather students from other districts to bring in to make it more cost beneficial. Salem, 5.5, 16.7. Saugus, 2.9 million funding, 7.7 million costs. So all of these areas you'll see as we get further into the slides have to be paid. It has to come from somewhere. These children are not denied their right to their education, and we have to find a way in the budget to get it. You'll see that as we move on. So just the districts I showed you, those 6 districts, $116 million is unfunded. These are costs that they bear, and the formula is supposed to provide for, and it does not. On the next set of charts, we're going to try and show you how the money comes to cover those costs. According to the formula, they give you so much money for administration, operation and maintenance, teacher professional development, and instructional materials, basically your curriculum and computers and whatnot. The formula says, this is for Chelsea, the formula says they're giving you the state is providing 3.5 million for the purpose of your administration. If they're spending 3.1 million, So right away, they took $400,000 from the administration and moved it into education. Operation and maintenance of the buildings. Mass School Budget Authority gives us money to build schools. They also require us to submit to them how we are going to properly maintain those schools to get a 30, 40, 50-year life out of them. They expect a certain amount of personnel, a certain amount of work done in the schools. But as you can see, according to their formula, $9.6 million should have been spent on schools, on the proper maintenance and care, and only $6.5 million. Where does the $3 million difference go? It went into education. Teacher professional development. The state's providing $1.3 million to help educate our teachers. Now, they require us to do professional development with our teachers, to keep them on pace, to keep them moving forward on how they educate and what they know and what they teach children. Everything's changing. New technology. They need to keep up on that, so they're required to do professional development. They all have licenses. They need a certain amount of what they call PDPs to keep those licenses when they renew them. The formula provided $1.3 million. Chelsea spent $2.6 million in order to do that. The formula underfunded it. Instructional materials. They spent $2.5 million. Yet the formula says they should have spent $3.5 million. They took $1 million out of that. These are the situations we're finding across all the districts. Most of these slides you're going to see are very, very similar. It doesn't matter what city or town you go to, especially the urbans and the rurals. The suburbans aren't as extreme as these, but they are in the same pattern as these. Again for Chelsea, this slide will show you, according to the formula, the state says you should have 28 special education aides. Those are primarily your paras in the schools. But because of the need of the special education and the funding that's not there, they're paying for 60. Formula's only providing for 28. Special ed teachers, formula pays for 46. Yet there's 80 special ed teachers. You have to give these students their services. You have no choice. Non-special ed aides, so basically regular education kids, they're very close with regular ed. 52 is what's being paid for, 52 is what they're spending. But now it goes down to the regular ed classroom teacher. The formula says they should have 511 regular ed classroom teachers. They have 332 regular ed classroom teachers. All those teachers in the middle, where do they go? They are either gone, haven't been hired, or been laid off in order to pay for the health insurance, the special ed costs, the low income factors, the English language learners. They go to other areas of the budget. Our budgets are 85% personnel, 85% teacher personnel. So when serious deep cuts come in, this is where it comes out. And what does that affect? That affects your class size. As Superintendent Smith said, 25, 27 kids in a kindergarten class. Next year it might be 30 if the funding doesn't come back. It's something that's unmanageable. Lynn, again, going with the same pattern. Lynn should have spent $7.9 million on administration. They spent $6.2. Maintaining their buildings, they should have spent $22 million. They spent $16 million. Again, all those funds are diverted back to the children. Teacher professional development, they should have spent $3.1. They cut the teacher professional development quite a bit. They're spending $2.7. Instructional materials, they should have spent $8.9 million. We all have new curriculums we have to buy. We all have to meet new online testing as of this year for the state, for the MCAS test. Yet we're cutting from instructional materials, $8.9 million, 3.5 is what they spent. All that money is being diverted. Same thing with their special ed. They have 222 special ed aides, paras. They're only paid for 78, they're only receiving from the formula. Special ed teachers, they have 223, the formula only accounts for 125. The regular paras, they have 56. But the formula says they should have 119. Why? They moved them up to there. Then your regular ed teachers. Again, this takes the brunt of the hit when they're short on funds. They should have 1,389, they have 1,035. They're short 354 teachers. I asked my counterpart in Lynn, their superintendent, if you had all the money, what would you do with those 354 teachers? They said over the years now, they've downsized so much they don't have the classrooms for them. But they would love to take the money and basically make class size back down to a manageable number like it should be. Malden, same pattern. They should be spending 3.6 on administration. They spend 2.5. They cut there. Operation and maintenance, same pattern. You see that our buildings are taking a big hit. So these are our investments in our community. Cities and towns pay, if not a portion, they pay a large portion for these buildings. Yet they're not receiving the funds to properly maintain them. Professional development's almost gone here. Again, you have to take the money from somewhere. And then again, their equipment and technology and curriculum. Same thing, big hit. 3.8, they only spent 1.6. You see the same, even larger number disparity on, percentage-wise, on their teachers and aides. Aides, they got 106. For special ed, they only paid for 34. 170 special ed teachers, they only receive funding for 55. That's a huge gap. And again, special ed is one of the main focuses of the Foundation Budget Review Commission's report. Jump down to teachers. They should have 580. They only have 390, 190 teacher gap. Again, this is what affects our class size and ultimately our results in education. Revere, same thing again. Cuts. Operation and maintenance, $1.5 million, almost $2 million there. Teacher professional development, nowhere near what they expected to be spending. And instructional materials, again, the heart of the classroom, right there, huge cuts. And what will go out to the students. Same thing you see again, always a very large number when it comes to the special ed. We're not receiving what's necessary. Same thing with the teachers. Half of what should be there. Same thing with the aides, and again, 147 teacher gap in Revere. And these numbers, again, I'm not making up these numbers. These are according to what the state says they should be. Salem's actually keeping pace with their administration. They're a little ahead. Could be a lag, and maybe they cut, now they put someone back. But as you'll see again, their building costs, a little more than half. Teacher professional development, cut in half. Instructional materials, down more than half. And again, you'll see special ed, very large numbers, very small reimbursements. Because again, it's all formula driven. And again, number of teachers there, short. And again, last one, Saugus. Same pattern. Spending less than what you should be, spending less than what you should be, spending half what you should. The pattern is cut administration and cut textbooks, materials, education supplies. You can see their special ed numbers, huge. Reimbursement small, same thing here. They're also down, teachers. So it doesn't matter where we go, the same problem exists. I've done this for about 15 different communities already. I know they're doing it tonight, as Superintendent Smith said, down in New Bedford. They've got 3 or 4 communities there. Worcester is in Central Mass. I think they have 11 or 12 on their panel tonight. All the same. We've all spoken, they're all the same data. Nothing that we've put together ourselves, it all comes from state financial data. So just these 6 communities combined, just to take care of special ed, low income, English language learners, and health insurance, that's what I've got. $121 million is what's necessary to fix the problem, just for these communities. The problem was, last year when the budget came out from the governor, the entire statewide increase was less than this 121 million. The House and Senate subsequently put in some additional funds, which helped quite a bit. But overall, this is for 6 communities. There's over 350 in the, communities, districts. There's over 350 in the state. So again, without going into great length into each one of those slides, the point I'm simply trying to make is that we have been talking now for quite a few years that the formula needs to be adjusted. It needs to have a constant adjustment every single year. It's easier to adjust the formula a few percent every single year than it is to go 15 or 18 years, and now you need a huge adjustment. The education of today's students shouldn't depend on their zip code. In Brockton, we've cut for the past 5 years straight out of our budget over $20 million. There is really nothing left to cut in Brockton we can cut other than teachers, which it ultimately increases class size, which affects everything from education to safety to just everything that's with student learning. So that's our dilemma we're in. Thank you.
At this point here, we are going to pose some questions to our panel members. More than one may respond, and we will open it up to questions to the audience. Time permitting, we're making sure we have some opportunities. Superintendent Notary has the microphone, and if you raise your hand at that point, he'll come to you, and you can pose your questions to any of the panel members. The first question I'd like to ask is, what has been the impact of the financial circumstances and changes you have outlined on students, on teachers, and others working in the schools and on central administration? And I'd like to ask Dr. Diane Kelly, Superintendent from Revere.
Sure, I'll start. I want to thank Aldo first for putting all of that data together. It's pretty amazing when you look at it in the aggregate. And one thing that I want to mention about that data is when we look at, in particular, the special education staffing levels and the regular education staffing levels, I just want to make it clear that we are under state mandates to meet certain guidelines and restrictions for special education that we're not under for regular education. And that's why when you look at a formula that was built in 1993 and is based on cost of living expenses and things from 1993, that's why you see that disparity. It's the same as if you were trying to live today on a household budget that you designed in 1993 that didn't account for cell phones or a $150 cable bill every month or all of the other things that we've been grown accustomed to in our own lives. The same changes have been visited on education, but the formula has not grown to address that. And that's, the real problem that we face. And to Kathleen's question about what impact does this have on students and on teachers, I'll start with the kids. Aldo talked a lot about class size, and the situation in Revere is not terribly different than it is in Brockton or any of these other districts. We have kindergarten classes that are over 25 with only one teacher in the room. And I don't know if anybody has been in that kind of an environment, but it's a little bit like wrangling cats on a day-to-day basis. Those teachers, as a result of that, and in all seriousness, we have more and more kids who are coming to us with different social and emotional needs who've been through extreme trauma, some of them with interrupted formal education, and a variety of different needs that need to be addressed. But if we don't have the resources to address their individual needs, then it falls on the classroom teacher to take care of all of that. And when we're not providing adequate professional development, because our professional development budgets have been cut in order to pay for the health care costs that are not representative of today's world, they're representative of the 1993 world in the formula, that's where we run into a challenge. And that means, as bad as that is for the kids and the fact that it creates an equity gap in terms of who's getting what kind of an education, it also presents problems for us in terms of staffing. Teacher burnout is a real issue. And with what teachers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis compared to what they were dealing with 20 years ago, when they don't have the right textbooks, when they don't have the right technology, when there's not a social worker they can go to and say, help me figure out how to deal with this child, then that teacher, the things that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis become even more complicated. And I really, really worry about what we're going to do when teachers get to the point that this is just too untenable. So, I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to actually just build on what my colleague from Revere has said. I'm going to talk about the fact that our student population is more complex, needier. At the same time, from 1993, we have increased expectations. We have increased the rigor for all good reasons. This is the good work. This is the thing that we do best in education. We provide opportunities for our students. But it is high need. And at the same time, it's morally, what we're charged to do is to meet our students and provide for those needs so that we can make sure that they are going to be successful and have futures. And I sometimes, as a superintendent, feel like we've been living on a fixed income since 1993 in education. And that fixed income is not working. So at the central office, the impact on central administration, since 1993, with our budgets, we've had more mandates. More transparency translates into more reporting requirements. More money filtered through grants. Our professional development money that you saw on Chelsea, that's predominantly grants. We aggressively go after grants. And so that's why we're able to afford the professional development. The result is central administration is stretched thin. When you think of even just the last 10 years, if from Race to the Top on, we have revised curriculum standards multiple times. We've increased the rigor and expectations for student achievement and growth on the Mass Core standards. We've implemented revised testing, MCAS 1, MCAS 2.0, to meet the higher rigor contained in standards. We've implemented the WEDER standards for our ELL students and administered the access test to our ELL students. And both tests, all tests, are online, all on computers. That's technology we have to purchase, train, and use. We implemented, not to mention the fact that we have to build our bandwidth, we implemented a new educator evaluation system, improved professional standards for licensure and renewal of licensure for educators. We are college and career ready. We are early college programmed. We are sheltered immersion endorsed. We are social emotional trained. We are everything. And at the same time, this was all part of that grand bargain of 1993. You do all of this, and we will make sure there's adequate funding for all of these things and the higher accountability. We need to see the adequate funding adjust with the years.
Next question, and I'd like to pose this to Dr. David DeRusi, our superintendent in Saugus. Was there a point in time since the state established the foundation budget when the districts were, for the most part, able to meet the demands of students?
Again, I'd like to say the slides that Aldo presented, if you go back right around, up until about 2000 and give or take 2, I think we were at a place where you saw an increase in this budget, and school districts were able to adapt and adjust, take that added income and make adjustments. I would say, as you can see, from 2002 down, we've seen a lack of funding. But as you've already heard, there has been an increase and a spike in what at this time we define as special needs and students with special needs. Just autism rates alone that were once maybe 1 in 300 diagnosed are now down to probably 1 in 30. Your early intervention, which starts as early as grades ages 2.9, requires schools now to provide a level of service before preschool. So, and then you also add in the idea that we have classrooms now, children with trachs, children with feeding tubes, they are in schools, public schools. So we've had to build a level of special ed that probably was not thought of in the early 1990s, mid-1990s. Look at the increase in English language learners. I had the luxury of a pleasure of working in one of the most diverse districts because of the amount of language spoken just in Malden. They come to public schools. We have to build programs, we have to educate, we have to provide. Post-Columbine added a layer of school safety measures that all came with a cost, whether it's SROs, whether it's added security cameras, whether these things were not there back in that earlier formula. The explosion of technology, the need for one-to-one initiatives where every child should have a right to a computer, a tablet, a laptop. As we move more towards our curriculums that are online, we want children to be able to access it. We're filling that void now in schools. Homelessness. I don't think there was a great recovery after the last recession. A lot of families are still struggling. And minimum wage moving up to $12 does not make it any easier when gas was up to almost $4 a year ago, just to get to work. If you go down that poverty line, more and more families are experiencing poverty, which puts them more into the high needs category. And I think two things that have really sparked and escalated in the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years, social, emotional, and mental health of our students. Younger and younger students are in need of more and more social, emotional support. We're building behavioral programs for students as young as 3, 4, and 5. The other piece that is overlooked at times, the impact of the opioid situation in this state. We're running a grandparent/guardian group for people that are raising their grandchildren right now. Because that shift creates another layer of high-need students and high-need families that need our attention. So I would say we were funded to a point, but society and the face of public education has changed. And I think that's where we're at today, looking how do we keep up with societal needs, which play out in every public school across the state.
Thank you, Dr. DeRusi. The next question I'd like to pose to Mayor Ken Driscoll from the City of Salem. What inhibits the districts from providing additional local funds to support the schools?
Yeah, terrific. Great question, and I just want to say, when we think about local government, I'm always marvel at the work that we do. It's the one entity that educates all children, keeps your neighborhood safe, and improves and enhances those great public spaces where you make memories like parks and beaches, and also the places that you need, that infrastructure, roads, sidewalks, water and sewer utilities. And for Salem, I'll speak to our community, but you saw many of the statistics. The majority of dollars in the operating budget goes to school. We're at close to 70%, and that's not unique. If you look to cities and towns across Massachusetts, the largest part of anyone's operational budget is schools. It's the most important work we're doing. But it's not the only work we're doing. We have to tend to public safety needs. When you dial 911, you want somebody showing up fast, trained, and well-equipped. That takes investments. When you think about the other areas, water, sewer, important utility needs, roads and sidewalks, they cost dollars. There are other investments that we need to make at the local level that also tend to take up some of those dollars. The vast majority of revenues that come into cities and towns come from property taxes. And they have limitations, both legally, Proposition 2.5, and functionally. Property taxes are some of the most regressive taxes that exist. So the affordability to community members and how much they can afford also has a limit on how much we can spend. I want to call out the fact that, as we think about gateway cities in particular, they offer these amazing livable communities, right? I'm raising my family in a place where my kids go to school, not everybody speaks the same language, has different cultures, they celebrate different traditions. Not everybody gets the latest iPhone 10 the minute it comes out. We appreciate that, but it also comes with additional challenges. Language challenges, digital technology, many of the investments that we need to make beyond operational budgets. We want to be in buildings that have the latest investments. We need school buses. We need technology upgrades. There are capital costs in addition to operational. So there are limitations on the revenues that are coming in, and there are needs beyond education, even though I do agree it's the most important aspect of the work that we're doing. The bottom line is the next generation of leaders in each of our communities rely on our public schools. And the only way that we can really provide them with an education that's going to prepare them for whatever they're going to be doing next. 10 years ago, I didn't think our kids would be designing an app for a living. So what are they going to be doing 10, 15, and 20 years from now? We collectively need to prepare them. And it takes having additional resources. We are above net school spending. When I look at these numbers as a community, we have made it a priority. But it has come at the expense of other areas. And I think in many cities and towns, we can no longer pull rabbits out of a hat. We need a strong state partner that takes into account modern day cost with modern day revenue streams that are something that's going to drive that next generation to be as well prepared as we need them to be to address the many challenges that we have. I'm hopeful that the momentum is building. I think it's really important that people are here and that we don't sort of succumb. The time is now for us to really take advantage of the fact that we have a strong economy. We need to prepare schools, and we need to prepare kids in schools. And that's why I'm here, that's why I'm so committed to this, and I'm really grateful that so many of you are here as well.
Could I just add one thing to everything the mayor said is absolutely true, and I certainly agree with. I just want to emphasize the constraint on cities and towns by Proposition 2.5. I mean, we have very limited additional new money each and every year. And in many cases, cities the size of a Salem or a Chelsea, the amount that we can raise under Proposition 2.5 can't even cover the increases in one line item, like increases in group health costs. So demanding that the cities and towns pick up this huge need that exists in our school department. For many of us, as Mayor Driscoll said, we are providing far above net school spending to our school systems, but to continue to try to rely on cities and towns to use their limited property tax dollars to funnel additional money to the schools, that really is the responsibility of the state. Then you end up with have and have-nots. You end up with the wealthy communities that can afford to do that and can afford to do the Proposition 2.5 override for their school system. They have good school systems. And the cities and towns that can't possibly do that, the ones you see on this presentation, those are the ones that end up with a less than fair education. So it is imperative that the state needs to fill this gap to ensure that every city and town, regardless of their demographics or their wealth, can provide a fair education to their students.
If I could also too, across the state, across the nation, but across the state, our demographies are changing. And so it starts in the gateway communities, but it doesn't stay in the gateway communities. Demographies will change. There will be influx of students. In Chelsea, in the last 5 years, 5 years ago in 2013, we had 134 homeless students. In 2018, 445, an increase of 232%. The poverty level, the low income number is increasing, and we have to address it. Chelsea can't hold all of those students, so that means Chelsea students are going to Saugus, they're going to Revere, and to Salem, and to Waltham, and other places. In 2013, the percentage of English language learners in Chelsea was just under 20%. In 2018, our percentage is just under 40%. We have double. 40% of our student population are English language learners. These are students that need more help. They need more smaller class sizes, more resources, longer school days, and yet we do not have the money to be able to appropriately give them what they need.
Tom, let me come back to you as city manager in Chelsea also, and Dr. Borg, and ask you what will be happening next year, next school year, if additional funds are not provided.
Well, Superintendent Brooke can tell you about the difficulty we had just this past year in getting to a number that we could both live with. I mean, she needed far more than net school spending. The city provided as much as it possibly could, but even then it wasn't enough to avoid some really painful cutbacks in her system. And my sense is that next year will be more of the same and probably worse unless this formula is addressed.
For Chelsea Public Schools, 2 years ago we had a $2.7 million cut. Last year we had $3.2 million in cuts. It's cumulative, it builds. How much can we do? We are on the precipice, and how much can we do before we fall off that cliff? And we're not the only school district in this situation. As you heard, our colleagues from Brockton have had 5 years of consistent cuts. And yet we have a city council and a city manager who support us as much as they can. But this is not a sustainable model of funding school systems in our state. It is not, and the red flags have been up in front of us for a number of years, in particular with the Foundation Budget Reform Commission work. It's time to address it.
Dr. Kelly, let me come back to you. Can you describe the education programs or needs that your district is struggling to provide or not really addressing as a result of the funding dynamics we have described here this evening?
Sure, I think that we've talked about a few of them already, but I think the most important thing is the opportunity for students. And that is whatever the child's needs are at that particular time, they deserve to have those needs met. And that doesn't matter if they're special education needs or language acquisition needs or accelerated coursework needs. Whatever that child needs, we should be providing for them. And these budget cuts force us to eliminate anything that's not absolutely necessary or absolutely mandated. And so the kids lose out on all kinds of programming. The different kinds of art and music courses that every child should be having every single day, every year of their education in order to develop their holistic personalities and who they are as a human being are jeopardized when we're not able to provide those kinds of services for all students on a regular basis. And these are the kinds of things that we look at and we say, well, we have to find $2 more million to make our budget balance, and we can't control the healthcare costs, and we can't control the number of special education teachers or special education paraprofessionals we need because those things are mandated. So what are the things that we can control? And we look at things like extracurricular activities and outside of the regular school day programming and the number of regular education teachers that we have. And that's where we end up unwillingly making cuts because it's the only place that we have options. And what that does is puts all of our students on an unfair playing ground. So.
Dr. Kelly, you bring up a good point, and I know there are many school committee members out there and elected officials, and nothing is more difficult in a community during the months of May and June when you're struggling with whatever the deficit is, and you have young people coming before you saying, next year's my senior year in high school. How can you cut this extracurricular or this club or this opportunity with a sport? Or a little first grader has one opportunity in first grade to have appropriate materials, curriculum, student-teacher ratio. All of these things are critical now. So I will end with this question to the panel. Why is it important that this issue be dealt with at the legislative level now, and why is this a critical time?
Well, before I start, I do want to acknowledge Senator Sal DiDomenico, who is, I think, somewhere up at the back here, who has been a great friend of supporting the Foundation Budget Reform Commission recommendations. And so he is here this evening. The time is now because we have no more time left. You know, more cuts, we don't know where they're going to come from. We have cut all of our after-school programming at the elementary level 2 years ago. Middle school, we cut all after-school programming last year. It is time to codify in statute the changes in the formula. We need to make the formula work for us. It is time to save the futures of our students and to open those doors of opportunity, to continue to do that. Our students only have this year in 3rd grade. They only have this year in 8th grade or this year in 11th grade. We cannot afford to let them have another year of cuts that impact them in their school system. And so for that reason, the time is now, the urgency is now.
I would just say that it seems to me there are two really important reasons to act, for the legislature to act now. One, I do think there are a lot of school systems that are in a financial crisis. The superintendents can probably speak more of how many of their colleagues are sort of on the precipice. But my expectation is if this isn't addressed in this coming legislative session, you're going to have a lot more communities in FY20 doing what Brockton had to do, laying off significant numbers of teachers. The second thing I would say is there is some money now. We are actually living in good economic times, and aside from the aberration of December revenues, which appear to be a timing factor, revenues have been running significantly above estimates for quite a long time. I think it is time for the legislature to utilize this good fortune and make education a priority and once again invest in education in this Commonwealth. You saw the graph showing that when this commitment was made 25 years ago, for 10 years, there was enormous money put into this effort. And yet for the last 15 years, adjusted for inflation, the money's been absolutely flat, even declined. You know, this isn't easy. This requires a lot of money, and I don't envy the legislators that are dealing with so many competing interests. But budgeting is all about priorities. That's what every budget is. It's a policy statement on your priorities. And the legislature has to once again make education a priority, because if it doesn't, there will be too many have-nots again in the Commonwealth. And that's exactly what the court system said cannot happen in our state.
So I think Mary and Tom said it perfectly, but I will just add that we owe it to our kids, we owe it to the future of this Commonwealth to be forward-thinking and not just thinking about what's happening here today in this auditorium in the city of Malden, but think about where do we want our kids to be 10 or 15 years from now? Because if we're not working with our kindergartners and our preschoolers today, they're not going to be prepared to thrive and lead this Commonwealth 15, 20, 25, 30, 50 years from now. And we've sat for 25 years now, and Tom had mentioned the math. The first 10 years, everything went well. And Dave had mentioned it was about 2002, the last time we saw an adequate increase in education funding. So we're 15 years in arrears, 17 years in arrears on what we should be spending to help our kids prepare for the future. It really is it's getting to the point that it's too late, so we need to absolutely act. And I'll say the legislators have done the work. There's been work done at Beacon Hill for the last several years. The Foundation Budget Review Commission did their work and put their proposals forward. All of the foundational work is done. It's time to act.
Not much to add. I think everybody in this room recognizes the complexity of what we are trying to do right now in our public schools across every zip code. It is becoming more difficult to make this happen. The work has been done. A lot has been shifted to the administrators, the teachers, the paraprofessionals. We have taken on a huge responsibility. With that responsibility, we need the adequate funding.
So quick exclamation point. The longer we wait, the harder it is to actually address. There's no really good reason to put it off. The work in terms of the studies that have been done, right now, all of our school committee members, many of our city councilors, all of our school officials are working on preparing budget for fiscal year 20. That's the work that we do for the next few weeks, months, months. we'll be having to make some really, really difficult decisions. It would be great to know that we're going to have a partner along the way. And I always say to our superintendent, if we're not planning for it right now, it doesn't get done in September. If we're not budgeting for it, we can't actually expect that we're going to really make the type of achievement and growth we want to in certain areas. So I think there is a sense of urgency. I hope you're feeling that. There's a lot of people working hard. There's a lot of folks who have already laid the groundwork. And now we need to push this forward with some positive momentum and recognize the benefits, not just to the kids in our district today, but certainly to the kids in our district in the future as well.
I want to finish with a quote of the Foundation Budget Review Commission's own words. The good work begun by the Education Reform Act of 1993 and the educational progress made since will be at risk so long as our school systems are fiscally strained by the ongoing failure to substantively reconsider the adequacy of the foundation budget. Thank you very much, and we are going to open this up to questions from the audience. Superintendent O'Terry.
Sure, just before we begin, I'd like to give the panelists one more round of applause. Also, this event was sponsored by the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, and I'd like to have Tom Scott, the Executive Director, stand up. He's been a real advocate support for all of our school administrators, but most importantly, the children of Massachusetts, which is at the forefront of all the decisions we make as school leaders. As you can see, we did run out. We had hoped for about 200 folks. We had over 350 people show up, so we ran out of printed copies. But if you go to www.masssoup.org/massforums2019, you can get copies of the PowerPoint presentation that was up there, as well as any additional information on Project Equity, and you can sign up to be part of an email list when we have more forums and more information coming out on Project Equity. So we've got a number of those opportunities to become involved. This will be an ongoing dialogue that we hope to have throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because this is critical. I think that the common theme that we heard this evening was it's about our students, our kids, they are our future. It takes a village to raise a child. And guess what? Massachusetts is the #1 village in the country in terms of our test scores. And we've got to really put all those resources, harness them, and give our kids the opportunity to succeed in a 21st century education that will help them and help our future generations. So I want to thank everyone for taking a part of that. We will take questions from the audience. If I could have a show of hands, if you could state your name, where you're from, and your role.
My name is Matthew Bach, and I live in Malden, Massachusetts. And the first thing I want to say is I'm very proud that the Malden School Committee and Superintendent O'Terry was one of the very first school committees to resolve to support I'm a teacher, our math teacher Fund Our Future campaign. And this is looking for $1.5 billion to fund K through higher ed education, and it's really important, and I'm really happy to see all of you folks on the panel leaping on board of this campaign. And what I would really like as a teacher, I teach in Andover, which is one of the more affluent towns, which would receive less money from the foundation budget, but it's still very important. And I'm very concerned, and what I would like to hear the panel and Mr. Scott commit to is full endorsement of the Fund Our Future campaign, which means not only funding, but no new carve-outs from private interests, including testing companies like Pearson, no new accountability measures, no new Mystic Valley private interests sucking millions of dollars from our city of Malden. The only accountability measure I want to hear the panelists support is holding the state and the tremendous affluence in the state and in the Commonwealth accountable to our public schools.
Any comment from the panel?
Well, I think all of us can state the fact that our intention tonight across our state in 3 different regions is to build the knowledge and the awareness of everyone, of all stakeholders, so that we can increase the advocacy for students at the state level.
Next question.
My name is Tai Chong from Lowell. I'm a parent. I got 3 kids. I use the word I a lot. My pronoun he, him, his. So I got 3 little ones. I'm kindergarten, so I'm preschool. And I'm listening to this, and I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed. 1.5 billion to take away from my kid experience an amazing education that he's supposed to be getting. 1.5 billion, that's a lot. It should be like that. Over 25 years? Are you kidding me? That's a long time. So I'm frustrated, first of all. Second, my question is, when you talk about bridging that gap, right, communications, you talk, man, sorry, I forgot your name, but when you talk about language barrier, right? What are the communication that you've been working on with communicating with, I'm refugees, so I'm used to being I was a former refugee. What are communication when you've been giving to like the refugees and immigrant communities, the low income communities, right? The people who classify as from the people who fall into the crack, right? And the LGBTQ plus communities, which we voted yes. And what are those, what is the step that you're doing to communicate this information that you got, that given out to me by somebody important to be here? Like, what are the stuff that have you been doing it? Have you been telling your communities? And what are the response from those communities? What are the next steps? I'm worried about it. We got to take actions. But what are the next steps? What does sense go with these type of communities? It's like, hey, we're going to form whatever, a town, a city, and school community. Let's walk out. Let's demand it. Not begging anymore. What are the next steps? That's what I'm wondering.
I'll begin to address it. In Brockton, back when this started a number of years ago, one of the things that we did in every one of our schools, through every one of our communities, including a large representation with our bilingual community. I had bilingual forums throughout the district, and we had a campaign called Brockton Kids Count. And we had thousands of people coming together and advocating. We have since continued those forums in our community. We had been to the State House, we called it a rolling rally last May 10th. So you make a good point. When you talk about communities, like every one of them up here, we're a very diverse community. And our strength lies in every one of our constituents representing sometimes first generation here in the country, just happy to have an education. And that's not enough. So we have been educating them to come on board, to develop strong partnerships throughout our schools, and we continue to do that each and every day in our district.
In Chelsea, it's very similar. We have been, since I served on the Foundation Budget Reform Commission, we have been out in the community with our nonprofits, the Collaborative, and other places. We've educated in terms of presentations of school committees, school site councils, making sure we have translators. I have posted information to website, Twitter, Facebook, every medium that we can possibly, including the local Chelsea Record. So we have been out there educating. And at the same time, this is so complex and so difficult to understand at times. I think that becomes the barrier, that it really is something that has to be done over and over and over again. And keep in mind, I've been doing it since 2015, when the Foundation Budget Reform Commission first came out with their report.
I think the coalition building is starting for this year, starting right now. It's January 8th, and we've had 300 people come and not only get educated, but also what is that next step that we can do. There's a lot of opportunities for mayors and superintendents to work together, and school officials and city councils and school committee members. Ultimately, it's going to take a legislative act. So I'm signing you up for Lowell. I'll take Salem, and we really do need to do the coalition building with everybody in our community. And I think the groundwork's laid, we're ready to really take off and start.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Adrian, and I'm a parent in Revere. My two girls actually are out of school now. I went through 1999 to 2018, and I've seen dramatic changes in the education system over the years between higher class sizes and lower class sizes and a whole bunch of things. And in Revere, like everybody else, our school systems are held to very high standards. I know in Revere I can speak. When the Department of Ed or the state says they want somebody to open an innovation school, Revere has stepped up. When they ask for people to do the extended learning schools and come up with plans, Revere has done it, we have 3. We haven't let poverty or language barriers step in our way. To this point, we keep stepping up. And I'm grateful for the education my daughters got. We wanted to stay in Revere. Financially, we were able to move to more affluent communities, but we chose to stay in Revere because that's what we wanted for our girls. And we have done our part certainly to do whatever we can in lobby with the schools, but the state certainly isn't holding their end of the bargain. And it's not really a question, I guess, but more of a comment. When you ask the cities to continue to step up, and we do, why is it that the state or the Department of Ed or whoever doesn't have to do the same thing that the cities have to do in towns to keep up with it?
We had a long period of inaction, and now all of a sudden we've got this weird period where we've got the state legislature, the state senate crafting a bill, Senator Diaz, Senator Lewis pushing, which we know I think will be good. We've also now heard today that the governor is going to be putting forward a bill on the Foundation Review Commission. So my question around that is, we know that we have a governor whose proclivity is to put money from true public schools into public charter schools. And what I'm wondering is whether or not the MASS has had any input in what the governor is doing, and whether or not there's a seat at the table to have superintendents push for what we might expect, or if we know what we might expect from what that legislation from Governor Baker might look like as it comes out towards the end of the month. Thank you.
My colleagues are pointing to me. In terms of the governor's budget, we have input through certainly our meetings with the commissioner, our meetings certainly with the executive office. It filters up, so to speak, in terms of what those needs are. Ultimately, however, the budget is put together and released by the 3rd week in January from the governor's office. At that point, our opportunity certainly will be to work with the legislators to take a look at the budget and see if it's something that is going to meet our needs or not meet our needs, and where do we start to now have those conversations with the House and then with the Senate in terms of increasing, I would predict, what's in the budget. So do we have a seat at the literal table? Not when the budget is being put together. At the same time, there is a process for that filtering up information to take place.
Less about the budget, more about the bill itself. Separate bills, is that coming out yet?
More about the bill than the budget formulation itself. Do we have a seat more at the formulating the legislation of the bill, not necessarily the formulation of the budget is what the question.
I mean, they asked for recommendations, and certainly our recommendation certainly would be here in terms of the budget. The bill itself, I think you're talking about, the bills are done by the legislators. You mentioned Sonia Jane Diaz and someone else, I forgot.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Richard Moronski. I'm the chairperson for the Chelsea School Committee. Not only has the funding changed in the last 20 years, but what's dramatically changed is parenting. We come from a city where it's loaded with single parents, and it goes into the school systems. And then the teachers today, it's unfair to them to teach what goes in there. We have social workers there. Years ago, we never had social workers. And I don't believe it's just money, because Chelsea was always a poor community, and people like Dr. Bork came out of Chelsea. We have a principal, Jackie DeVere, came out of Chelsea. So my question is, how come nobody in this state addresses the parenting issues, especially in the inner cities? If the parenting doesn't get better, I can't see the school system getting better. So, thank you. Next question.
Hello, my name is Jessica Gold-Harrelson, and I'm an educator here at Malden High School. And my question to you sort of echoes Mr. Weldy's question. I think what he was maybe trying to get at, I don't want to presume. But we're currently in the middle, as a teacher of English language learners, I'm currently in the middle of preparing all of our learners, over 300 at Malden High School, for access testing. And this is testing that might end up taking days, and I know that for many school districts it sometimes takes weeks of our students' time. My question has to do with a concern that perhaps Governor Baker or other people in the state legislature might attempt to tie a funding increase to an increase in high-stakes accountability. I don't want to pressure you guys in terms of asking you to come up with an opinion about tests or whether or not we should be having them at all, but it concerns me as a teacher seeing high school students going through days and sometimes weeks of high-stakes testing. It concerns me to think that perhaps this funding increase could be tied to it. I was wondering if you guys could sort of talk about what opinions you might have about if that legislation would be tied to testing. Thank you.
So I'm going to respond without specifically answering that question because I have no idea what's in the governor's bill. All I would say is, as is always the case with anything that comes out of the governor's office, it's a starting point for discussion at the legislature. There are legislators here, senators, who can speak much more intelligently than I about this, but whatever the governor proposes, that's a starting point for discussion, negotiation, and once that discussion starts, stakeholders like teachers, like superintendents, like mayors and city managers will have an opportunity to weigh in with legislators who, at the end of the day, will craft the bill that will ultimately, we hope, become law. So there will be plenty of opportunity to weigh in if there are particular aspects of whatever the governor proposes that don't fit with what this group, this advocacy effort is trying to do. There'll be plenty of opportunity to weigh in, and really, at the end of the day, as is always the case, it is going to be the legislators that will have the final say on what ultimately ends up being the final piece of legislation. So you'll have plenty of opportunity with your advocacy as Mass Teachers Association to weigh in on what the governor is proposing. It is hardly going to be the final word on the subject.
Everything that Tom just said is absolutely true, is we need to get moving on this, and we can't just sit back and say, well, we don't want the money if, or we won't take the money if. We're taking the money, period. We've taken the money, period, no matter what, for the last 25 years. We've figured out how to, move around some hurdles and get through some situations when we've had to, but accountability is not our enemy. Fair accountability is actually necessary. It's when we have unfair accountability or we're held to levels or expectations of accountability when funding is not in place and we have unfunded mandates that prevent us from achieving the accountability levels that we're ascribed to. But accountability in itself is not necessarily an enemy. And I'll tell you an anecdote about Revere. I've said this many times publicly before and I'll say it again. When MCAS came out, Revere High School students scored at the very, very bottom of the state. We were in the lowest, about 5%. It was really quite embarrassing. I was a teacher at the high school at the time. But we also had a system where we allowed kids to graduate from high school having taken only 2 years of mathematics and maybe 1 year of a lab science. It wasn't necessarily required that you take any. The 2 years of math that kids were allowed to graduate with, I actually taught. One of them was called Consumer Math 1, and the other one was called Consumer Math 2. And if I took those books off my bookshelf and showed them to you today, you would see that Consumer Math 1 was actually what we now call 5th grade math. And Consumer Math 2 was actually what we now call 5th grade math again. And kids would take that their junior year and their senior year and get a high school diploma. And that was not good for kids. The accountability that came with education reform and the introduction of MCAS was critical for the transformation of how we teach, what we teach, and who has access to all of those things. We don't want to give up all accountability. We want to make sure accountability is fair and measures things accurately and appropriately. So I don't want to go down a whole nother path of a whole different argument about whether or not schools need to be held accountable and all of those other pieces which have a whole different political connotation to them. But it's important to make this point that with funding, no one's just going to hand us money and say, go have at it. They're going to say, we want to know how you're spending, we want to know what you're doing with it, and we want to make sure it's having a positive impact on kids. And that's what public money should do.
Next question. Right here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, children are actively being subjected to broken, mismanaged, and racist educational systems whose failures systemically and generationally have left Black and Latino students behind. This is not how we're going to help district schools educate children of color and fix our school systems. This will not keep children like mine farther away from institutions and death. Our children and families in Massachusetts deserve better. Better schools, better superintendents, and better school committees. And what we want is justice, not blank checks. What specific plan to address the crisis around the achievement gap in Massachusetts with additional funding? So I want to know what's the specific plan on that, because we're 48th in the nation when it comes to the achievement gap. Another question is why did they schedule these 3 meetings on the same night, none convening in Western Massachusetts, given the challenges in places like Springfield and Holyoke? And also, to my brother Ty over here, I would like to see some Khmer interpretation as well, because not just Seoul has a heavy Cambodian population, we also have Lynn with a strong Cambodian population, so just wanted to ask that as well. Thank you.
I'm happy to address the reason for all 3 this evening. And first of all, we did have a forum in Western Mass on October 9th. It included Springfield, it included Holyoke, Chicopee was present, Brockton and Worcester had supported them. So we have had the same forum. As a matter of fact, superintendents from Western Mass are down supporting other districts this evening across the state. Our feeling was that this was a critical time, that the advocacy had to happen now. It is the beginning of a new year, a new budget season, and we need to be educating all of our members, all of the stakeholders, because everybody here cares about kids. So again, that is the reason for the advocacy. We did talk about next steps. I know MASS has been a big player, as have many other organizations supporting children in our state. And we will have an action plan to go from here.
Next question.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and to the people on the stage, thank you for your hard work. I know what it's like to be a superintendent, because we have one hell of a superintendent in Chelsea. I have a question. Tonight, what is coming out of this forum? How do we change the formula in which we, as superintendents and the school committee, can work with this legislature to make sure that they change the formula? I know I had to change my formula in my house. My budget changed a lot, I'll tell you. I work 3 jobs to keep my budget going. But my concern is how to change what's going on with the State House. I know I've worked with my legislators, and I'm so happy that we have Sal Domenico tonight, because he is the biggest supporter of education, and he's helped many communities. So my question to one of the members of the council on the board tonight, how do we change it as school committee members and as superintendents to work together to get the people at the State House to wake up and realize that the children in the community of Massachusetts, and all the communities in Massachusetts, I should say, are getting a raw deal. This is what we're here for, those children. I know in Chelsea we have a wonderful Camino class. Mary has brought this into the school system, and it works so well for the English-speaking and the Spanish-speaking children. They go in there, they learn Spanish, and they come out learning English too. So we're very lucky to have the money we have to have this program. But my situation is, and my problem is, how do we change this formula? Thank you.
If I could, looking at these districts, the only one I haven't been a teacher or an administrator in is Lynn. I apologize, I missed it somehow. I think the advocacy, to answer that question, is this is not urbans versus suburbans. It's not suburbans versus rurals. It's a statewide issue. Funding is funding. Whether you're an affluent community, you have issues that need to be addressed. I have worked in urbans. I am now what I would consider a sub-urban because, as Dr. Bork mentioned, I lived in Saugus, put my kids through Saugus. I went back to Saugus 3 years ago as a superintendent. It's different. Advocacy, one voice, one message, not doing what sometimes we do as educators is take one item and basically beat it to death. This is about public education. Every zip code, every child. That's how we will make this change. We cannot divide and conquer each other. And I believe part of this funding formula is to say equity across the board. One voice, one message. And I think that's how we'll make inroads.
I just want to tag on to my colleague's comment. This is the advocacy. It's the beginning. Keep it going. Make sure that your school committees are sending resolutions to your legislators. Make sure that your stakeholders in all of your communities, all groups, whether it's your nonprofit in your community or your teachers, make sure that they're talking to their legislators. Because I have teachers and administrators who work in Chelsea, but they live in other communities with other legislators. And so those are certainly the legislators that we would want across the state to be able to vote for a change. And so yes, this is the beginning of the advocacy in your voice, and the voices should continue to keep coming together to support all of this.
Can I put one postscript on that as well? I want to also mention that the legislature has done a lot of work on this. The work of the foundation funding committees that put together a lot of time, a lot of information last year. There was a bill that moved pretty far. So I want to recognize that we have legislators who are super supportive, who understand the issue. It's really about getting that sense of urgency. There are a lot of needs in the Commonwealth. I always like to say there's a lot of birds in the nest. And we need to make sure that folks are aware of how much of a priority this is in our communities. When you have city leaders coming together with school leaders, I think that can really be a positive and important message, and hopefully create that momentum to end the talking and start the doing. And I think that's why we're all here and very interested in trying to move this along this year.
Okay, we're going to do one final question, then we're going to turn it back to Dr. Smith for a wrap-up.
Hi, my name is Dr. Waldo. I'm a proud public school educator here in Malden of the past 15 years, and also the really proud president of the Malden Education Association. I want to thank everyone who's here on the panel tonight, and everyone who's here in attendance. I think we're all here because we recognize that we're at a really important juncture in time right now, and that we recognize that it is time to end the systemic underfunding in gateway cities, urban districts, and communities of color. All of our students deserve the same funding and educational access, no matter what their zip code. And to that end, I know everyone's looking for action and actionable steps to take, and I have a comment and actually a question. And for those who like to take action right away, like myself, visit massedjustice.org, click on campaigns, and then fund our future, and you will find actionable steps to take immediately. I think you'll find that really helpful. And for everyone who's here tonight, what are the action steps you would like to see us take as soon as we leave here? Because I think we are in this room ready and raring to go for people who have students in the schools, for teachers and education support professionals and administrators who have students in these schools. What is it that we can do right now to make an impact to help Governor Baker, our state legislators, see how important this is, because we are in crisis. We have a rainy day fund in Massachusetts and it is raining. What can we do now?
So I will start. I think that the first thing that everybody in this room can walk out of here do is type an email to your elected officials and just say, what are you doing about the education funding this budget year? What are you doing when you're meeting with your colleagues on Beacon Hill? And how are you going to help us make sure that we're funding education appropriately?
So I was going to actually say, I like the idea of the email, but I'd walk out tweeting and make sure you're tweeting. And certainly at the same time, it's not just what are you, it's not just asking the question, what are you going to do with your colleagues to promote this? But then the second half of it is, because I do believe in a 50-50 relationship, how can I help you? Because I am 50% of the responsibility and the action step. So it's how can I help you as well?
One of the things I'm thinking about is how do we mobilize our students? So we need to build a coalition. We need to create a sense of urgency. I look around this room, and there are many of us who are involved in local government at different levels. But I don't want to miss out on the most important variable we have, which are the students who we're all spending so much time trying to make sure that they're. This is not going to roll off the lips for everybody we meet, so there's got to be a big education component, and the information's here, it's available. Trying to use that to educate members of our community, from the students that we're serving to the seniors that live in our community, about the importance of this. I think that coalition building is really, really important. And I would really not want us to look at the legislature as an enemy. I think the legislature are the folks that we want to build a strong coalition with, to recognize that this needs to be the top priority for this year. There's a lot of work that's been done. There's a lot of good folks at the State House who I think want to do this. We need to make sure they understand how urgent it is in our communities.
I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening in Malden, certainly for hosting us. This has been a fabulous turnout, a lot of good discussion and great steps, and I think we can all agree that every kid counts. I do, before we close, want to give, we talked about the work with our legislators, which has been going on a long time. We talked about the hours spent on the Foundation Budget Review Commission reporting, the recommendations, the bills. There has been a lot of advocacy. Getting everybody together is truly mobilizing every one of us to talk about this being a priority in this budget season, and we will not rest until this is done for our kids throughout the Commonwealth. That being said, we do have many legislators out there, I believe, this evening. Is there anybody that would like to address the audience? We just want to make sure we give people an opportunity. I guess we're all set. Thank you so much, Malden, and all the communities.